Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for the introduction, Roland. My name's Martin Whitaker. I'm CEO of Diurnal. I'm joined here this evening by our CFO, Richard Bungay, and our supply chain manager, Joe Holt, who's based in Manchester. And it's been a while since we presented in Manchester. Last time we presented was around the end of 2017. But really, in those 18 months, it really has been a transformational time for Diurnal. In that time, we're one of a few UK biotech companies to successfully take a product, from concept all the way through clinical trials, through to commercialisation, and be generating revenue. I'll talk about our first product, Alkindi, in more detail in our presentation. But now it has a run rate of over £1 million in our first year, as we're approaching our first year of sales, and certainly, according to analysts, predicted to expand after that. So in terms of a recap on Diurnal, we were floated on AIM at the end of 2015. That was our share price at IPO. Our current share price is listed up there, as is our current market cap. Our cash position at the end of the calendar year 2018 was a strong one. We had £6.9 million in the bank, and that's been supplemented since then by £2.3 million worth of R&D tax credits which have come to the company. And also earlier on this month we completed a fundraising of £5.93 million to strengthen our balance sheet. We have no debt, and we have some very key long-term investors in Diurnal, such as IP Group, Development Bank of Wales and Polar Capital, all of whom are very well known in the sector. In terms of a management team, we have a very strong management team that capture all the attributes that we need to be a successful pharmaceutical company. In Peter Allen, our chairman, we have a chairman that's led several pharmaceutical companies through to successful exit. I've taken several products through pharmaceutical development through to commercialisation. In Richard, we have business development experience. And in Richard Ross, our founder, we have a clinician, a key opinion leader, whose network we utilise around the world to market our products. In terms of the investment summary, we're focusing very much on the endocrinology market. When I say endocrinology, that means hormones, and we believe that's around a $10 billion market opportunity both in Europe and in the US. We're initially targeting one specific hormone and one specific set of diseases around cortisol deficiency, and that's a market valued in excess of $3 billion per annum. And we have two products that target this market. The first product is a paediatric product called Alkindi. As I mentioned, it's already approved. It's marketed and launched in Germany and the UK, and is generating revenues for the company. And we have the sales and marketing infrastructure for further launches across Europe. Our second product is for adults with these diseases. It's called Chronocort, and that recently completed a pivotal phase 3. That's the final clinical trials that it needs for market authorisation. And we plan to submit for market authorisation this year with an anticipated positive opinion from the regulator, the European Medicines Agency, towards the end of 2020. And the real commercial opportunity that we see for both Alkindi and Chronocort is the way that these products are marketed and the way that these are prescribed. So if you have diseases of cortisol deficiency, these are treated by specialist physicians who tend to be located in university hospitals, such as the hospitals here in Manchester. And indeed in the UK there's around 17 such specialist centres. In the big EU5 there's around 120 such centres. And therefore with a very modest sales force, perhaps 20 or 30 reps at peak for both products, we can actively target all of our prescribers where the vast majority of our patients reside. We have already entered into marketing and distribution agreements in certain territories around the world, such as Australia and Israel, and we hope that Alkindi will be available in those territories from 2020 onwards, and we're seeking commercial partners in the US. The diseases that we're dealing with are rare or orphan diseases, and these come along with certain regulatory privileges. the so-called orphan drug legislation, which affords 10 years market exclusivity, post-authorization in Europe, and 7 years market exclusivity in the US. Added to that, we have a wholly owned Diurnal patent portfolio, which is now granted in most major territories worldwide, and that extends that exclusivity period all the way out to 2034 for both products. And beyond our lead products, we have an earlier stage pipeline which is being taken through the clinic. So with those attributes, our vision is to become a world-leading endocrinology specialty pharma company. And the opportunity that we're addressing is addressing significant unmet patient needs in endocrinology. And the endocrine system is absolutely critical to life. It is a collection of glands that produce hormones, which are the chemical messengers that regulate a number of very important functions around the body, ranging from sexual development, metabolism, and growth. If you do not produce a hormone, or your body cannot produce a hormone through disease, through genetic causes, then often you need to be replaced with a hormone, and often that hormone replacement needs to be for life. So here we're dealing with very long-term, chronic, debilitating diseases for these patients, which need specialist treatments. When we talk about endocrinology, we talk about hormones. The hormone that everybody has heard of is insulin, and the disease is diabetes. And indeed, if you look at this Venn diagram here, then all the large pharmaceutical companies have been focused on the diabetes area for a number of years. This is a huge market, some $50 billion per annum. And a lot of these companies have multiple products in this area. However, at Diurnal, we spend a lot of time speaking to physicians outside of diabetes, and we've identified a multitude of diseases, which can be seen here on the right, where treatments for patients are really suboptimal. And this is the area that Diurnal operates in. It is an area of low competition. There are one or two comparator companies, which are listed down here at the bottom of slide 8. And usually and typically, these companies pick off one or two of these diseases with perhaps one or two products. But there's a real opportunity for Diurnal to start off with a few diseases in this area and really expand out. So this slide just gives an idea of our very focused development pipeline. As I mentioned, we're focused on diseases of cortisol deficiency, so just around one hormone, and I'll explain what that is in a minute. And with our two products, Alkindi and Chronocort. Alkindi already approved in Europe, and that's a market of some $88 million per annum. There are a couple of causes of cortisol deficiency, a genetic cause called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, which we're targeting initially for adults, and that's our next product, which we're targeting in Europe. That's got a market size of around $350 million per annum. And there are other diseases of cortisol deficiency that occur later on in life, the so-called adrenal insufficiency. And using the same product, our second product, Chronocort, we're then able to expand into these areas of adrenal insufficiency, where these markets do become really quite large, moving into the multi-billion-dollar markets. Beyond our two lead products, as I mentioned, we have a pipeline of other products which are at an earlier stage of development. I'll just mention the testosterone product, which has already gone into the clinic for the treatment of low testosterone in men. We've just completed a phase 1, phase 2 trial in patients, and that will read out in the second half of this year. And we have a couple of products at the earlier stage of development. But for the rest of the talk, I'll focus on our two lead products and talk a little bit more about this very important hormone, cortisol. So cortisol is an essential hormone. This is really essential for life. Without cortisol, you will die. And for those patients who unfortunately cannot produce cortisol, they'll need to be replaced with a substitute every day for the rest of their lives. There are two main causes of cortisol deficiency. The first is what's called adrenal insufficiency, or AI, and this is an acquired loss of cortisol during your lifetime. Two main causes here. The first is what's called Addison's disease. This is an autoimmune disease where the body destroys its own adrenal gland, located just above the kidney, and that typically occurs around the ages of 20 or 30 years of age. There's a second cause, hypopituitarism, which is caused by a benign tumour in the brain, and that affects the signaling from the brain to your adrenal gland, affecting cortisol production, onset about 50 or 60 years of age. The primary symptom of adrenal insufficiency is chronic fatigue. These patients literally do not have the energy to get out of bed. 50% of them can't work, and they're always at risk of death through what's called an adrenal crisis. is when you do not have enough cortisol on board to fight off infection. There is a second cause of cortisol deficiency, and that's called congenital adrenal hyperplasia. That's a genetic disease, or CAH for short. And here you have the complications of a chronic fatigue, as you do with the adrenal insufficiency, but also you have an added complication for this patient group, in that they cannot produce cortisol from birth because of an enzyme block in the body. And what happens is, because they cannot produce cortisol, the building blocks of cortisol, powerful sex hormones called androgens, build up in the body, causing harm. So, for example, if you're a little girl that's born with CAH, you've got all these testosterone molecules buzzing around your body. Little girls may be born with ambiguous genitalia, so little girls look like little boys at birth. It may require corrective surgery. Both little girls and little boys go through puberty incredibly early on in life, perhaps the ages of 5 or 6. They grow very quickly as young children. But when it comes to the normal years where puberty should occur, actually growth is turned off and they end up being much shorter than adults, and complications continue into adulthood in terms of fertility, metabolism, and actually these patients will die some 7 years earlier than the normal population. So really the vision for Diurnal is, with our products Alkindi and Chronocort, to treat these patients effectively for the first time from birth all the way through to old age. As I mentioned, we have a very favourable competitive landscape for both of our products. In terms of competition in Europe, there's only one other licensed product, and it's only for the acquired disease AI, not for genetic disease CAH, where we have a clear route to market. And in the US, the position is even more favourable, with only a handful of competitors at a much earlier stage of development than we are. There's some 4 or 5 years behind us in development. So competition is favourable. And what I'll do now is I'll focus on the 2 specific products that we have. So Alkindi, we believe, is a major breakthrough in paediatric adrenal insufficiency, including the genetic disease congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Although the active ingredient of Alkindi is hydrocortisone, which I'm sure most people in this room have heard of, for these patients we need to take hydrocortisone orally, so we need to take it by the mouth, by some way. And although hydrocortisone has been around for 60 years, actually there's been very little innovation in this area since the first hydrocortisone tablets were invented in the 60s. And what young children from birth have previously taken is crushed adult tablets such as these. This is life-saving medication that's being given to children in the 21st century. And simply at Diurnal, we thought this is unacceptable. So we created Alkindi, which is the first licensed paediatric medicine for these children. So although hydrocortisone's been around for 60 years, actually no one ever applied for the license for paediatrics. And we are the first company to do that in Europe, and therefore we have first mover advantage. And just down here at the bottom of slide 13, you can see the commercial packs, but the UK packs, which are available in this country today. In terms of Alkindi, the product, the basis of approval in 2018 was what's called a Paediatric Use Market Authorization, or PUMA. And again, this is a regulatory right which affords us 10 years market exclusivity in Europe. So we have exclusivity in Europe till 2028. We successfully launched Alkindi last year, starting in Germany and subsequently in the UK. And importantly, we've achieved premium pricing for Alkindi in all the territories that we've submitted pricing to date, including the major ones such as UK, Germany, Italy, Austria, and the Nordics as well. We had first commercial sales in May of last year, and we're just approaching our financial year end. And like I say, we're now selling with a run rate of around £1 million worth of Alkindi. In terms of our future plans, we have all the commercial infrastructure in place and the supply chain in place for timely launches across the remaining European territories in due course. I'll now move on to Chronocort, which is our second product. This is for adults. It's a much bigger market. It's approximately 5 times as big as the Alkindi market. And we're looking around a $350 million opportunity for the genetic disease alone, and much larger for the acquired disease. And the key feature in treating adults of these diseases is all about replicating the cortisol rhythm that normal healthy individuals have. It's a very distinct rhythm in the body, and it's highlighted in orange. So the natural rhythm of cortisol is very low at night, enabling you to get to sleep. It then begins to rise at around 3 o'clock in the morning, and then gives you a peak on or just before waking. And that's really thought to prepare you for the day ahead, and then it gradually decreases throughout the day. If you have congenital adrenal hyperplasia, this genetic disease, you do not have this rhythm flat line, and you need to be replaced daily with cortisol. And for many years, physicians have identified the importance of this rhythm and tried to approximate the rhythm with the hydrocortisone tablets or other steroid tablets that are available. Here's one common treatment regimen shown in red. As you can see, it's a sawtooth profile, so you're treated with too much drug at certain times of the day, too little drug at other times of the day. But importantly for these patients is on the left-hand side of the graph is there's no overnight coverage of cortisol. And this is really important for these patients because this is when these sex hormones, these powerful androgens begin to rise, mirroring the rise in cortisol and cause damage to your body. So if you take your dose of cortisol or hydrocortisone first thing in the morning, it's already too late, the damage has been done. So at Diurnal, we invented Chronocort, which is what we call a modified release hydrocortisone. So it uses the same active ingredient, hydrocortisone, the synthetic version of cortisol, and it's designed to be given in a toothbrush regimen lasting at night, first thing in the morning, so that when you take Chronocort lasting at night, there's no release for a period of 3 to 4 hours. Then the hydrocortisone begins to release gradually overnight, giving you a peak on waking, as you can see by the blue line here. And when you take a second dose, same product, first thing in the morning, and that fills in the gap for the rest of the day. And what we showed in our initial clinical trials was that when patients switched from their standard of care to Chronocort for 6 months, that 94% of patients had their androgens, these sex hormones, controlled into the optimal range, which was a highly statistically significant result. And based on that result, we designed our pivotal phase 3 trial, which read out at the end of last year. And what we showed in that trial, and what the regulators wanted us to show, was they wanted us to get these androgens into a reference range over the 24-hour period, which is shown by the blue boundary here and the grey boundary here. And you can see patients on Chronocort on 6 months in the blue line here, and the standard of care in red. And what we showed in our phase 3 trial, that Chronocort was safe, it was efficacious and actually performed better than in the phase 2 trial and controlled the androgens better than the standard of care. However, due to the statistical method of analysis that was chosen, our primary endpoint was unfortunately not met. This is due to this quite complex statistics that we use called standard deviation score. But nevertheless, when you look at what patients reported and the raw data that you've seen on the previous slide, it was clear that Chronocort did control androgens over a 24-hour period. We took this information back to the regulator, the European Medicines Agency, and in April of this year, they gave us the green light to submit for market authorization using this current data. And the reason they allowed us to do that was for the list of reasons listed here on slide 17, in that Chronocort did achieve significantly better control of these androgens, particularly in the morning period. It was less variable than the standard of care. We had more episodes of unexpected therapeutic benefit on Chronocort, fewer sick day rules, and importantly, no adrenal crises on Chronocort. And these are hospitalizations, which you often see with a standard of care. We saw no hospitalizations with Chronocort. So the regulator confirmed that we can carry out, use the data that we generated to support our market authorization. So to recap where we are in Europe, we've carried out the largest study in this rare disease to date, 122 patients across 11 centres. The study is completed. We have positive scientific advice from a regulator, and we will submit our dossier to the EMA at the end of this year and anticipate a positive opinion towards the end of 2020. In terms of the rest of the world, we continue our activities there. In the US, as I've mentioned, we're looking for partners for both Alkindi and Chronocort. In Japan, we've recently had our key patents granted. That's again the third largest pharmaceutical market in the world. Recently in Australia and New Zealand, we were granted orphan drug status, which gives us these regulatory privileges. and we will submit our marketing package to the regulator there shortly, and we've already submitted our marketing package to the Israeli authorities as well, and that's undergoing review. So really, in terms of this year, we're anticipating 4 regulatory filings across the world addressing the cortisol deficiency markets. But really looking ahead for the next 3 years, we believe that this is a very exciting time for Diurnal in terms of the products that we're bringing to market to treat this patient group. And this slide really summarises where we are. The key approvals coming up will be the submission at the end of this year of Chronocort in Europe and approval a year later. For Alkindi, again, from a regulator, we've got a green light to submit from the FDA. So again, we will submit by the end of this year. It takes about a year to review and an estimated approval about a year later. We have our pivotal studies designed and ready to go in the US, and those are most likely to be picked up by a partner. And we've also had feedback from a European regulator that in the wider disease, this adrenal insufficiency, the acquired disease, that once we have a license for CAH, we can then expand directly to adrenal insufficiency in the medium term around 2021, 2022. So in terms of the outlook for 2019, we certainly believe it's very favourable. We've carried out a lot of work over the past 6 to 12 months, which you can see we've ticked off here on the right-hand side of the slide. Upcoming news flow includes our full year results in September, where we'll update on our Alkindi sales and some of our pipeline programs. And of course, the key activities this year are our successful dossier submissions to both the European regulator and the US regulator as well for Alkindi and Chronocort respectively. So to summarise, we're building a global endocrinology specialty pharma company. We have a strong base with our lead products in orphan diseases with strong exclusivity. We have a credible market access strategy as proven by Alkindi. We have longer term opportunities to broaden out the pipeline, and we have a strong management team that can deliver. And thank you very much for your attention.